Okay, so you're here with us for the deep dive, and today we're going to be getting into something really interesting.
Yeah.
A law from 1798.
A blast from the past.
Yeah, it sounds like it should be irrelevant, but it's
Right.
actually very relevant today.
Yeah. Ripped from the headlines.
So we're going to be talking about the Alien Enemies Act,
That's right.
and we're going to figure out exactly what it is, how it's been used, and why it's causing so much debate right now.
Yeah, we're going to look at the actual text of the law itself, and we're also going to look at some of the news coverage surrounding this resurgence.
Okay, so first of all, what is this Alien Enemies Act?
So basically, it's a U.S. law that goes all the way back to 1798, and it's
Okay.
part of these Alien and Sedition Act.
Mm-hmm.
And the Alien Enemies Act specifically gives the president a lot of power.
Okay.
It allows the president to detain and deport or restrict the movements of non-citizens
Yeah.
or from countries that are considered hostile to the United States.
Hostile, like we just disagree with them, or hostile, like,
So this is really important.
okay,
The act specifically says during times of declared war
okay,
or invasion,
got it.
that's when this can be triggered.
Okay.
And here's a really important part.
Mm-hmm.
The president can actually take these actions against people simply based on their nationality.
Oh, wow.
There doesn't have to be any kind of hearing, no individual wrongdoing, even alleged.
Wow.
You're a citizen of a hostile nation during a declared war or invasion.
Right.
The president can use this law against you.
Okay, so this law has actually been used.
It's not just some dusty old document that nobody ever thinks about.
Binary.
It has been invoked and used,
Okay.
thankfully, relatively few times in U.S. history.
When was the first time?
The very first time was during the War of 1812.
Okay.
And that was President James Madison, and he used it against British nationals who were living in the U.S.
Okay. Makes sense. We were at war with them.
Exactly.
When else was it used?
It was also used during World War I. And that time, it was against nationals from what was called the Central Powers. So that would be countries like Germany and Austria-Hungary.
Right.
But I think the one that is probably the most well-known and maybe the most relevant to our discussion today
Okay.
is World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So after the attack on Pearl Harbor,
Right.
President Franklin Delano Roosevelt invoked the Alien Enemies Act.
Yeah.
And that led to the apprehension and, in some cases, the removal
Right.
of non-citizens from Japan, Germany, and Italy.
And were there people who thought that was not the right thing to do at the time? Were there any dissenting voices that we know about?
Well, there were certainly debates, I think, surrounding civil liberties during wartime.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sources that we're looking at primarily focus on just sort of like the legal basis and the application of the act.
Right. Yeah, it would be interesting to go back and see if there were more
Absolutely.
sort of ethical concerns at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
But in those cases, it was pretty clear cut.
Yeah.
We were at war
Right. Exactly.
with those countries formally.
Formally declared war.
Yeah. Okay, so let's fast forward now to 2025.
Okay.
March of 2025. What happened?
So in March of 2025, President Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act.
Okay.
But this time, it wasn't against a specific country like we've seen in the past.
Okay.
It was actually aimed at individuals that were associated with a Venezuelan gang
Okay.
known as Tren de Aragua.
Okay. I've heard of this.
Yeah, and so the administration had actually officially designated this gang as a foreign terrorist organization.
Right.
And this was really significant because this was the first time that this law, the Alien Enemies Act, had been used since World War II.
Wow, since World War II.
So like you said before, those other times, it was pretty clear-cut.
Yeah, we were at war
Declared war.
with another country.
Right. So this is a really significant departure from how it's been applied in the past.
Okay. Yeah, and it seems like it immediately caused some problems. Like, I remember when this happened, there were legal challenges right away.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a few days after President Trump invoked the act,
Mm-hmm.
a federal judge issued a temporary restraining order,
Okay.
which basically halted the deportation of 5 Venezuelan nationals who were linked to Tren de Aragua.
Oh, wow. So they were going to be deported, and then this judge said, no, hold on.
Yeah, bump the brakes.
Okay.
We need to take a look at this.
What were the judge's concerns?
So the judge had a couple of really big concerns.
Yeah.
First of all, he questioned whether the Alien Enemies Act could even be legally applied
Okay.
when the U.S. is not in a formally declared war with Venezuela.
Right, because we're not at war with Venezuela.
Exactly. And remember, the act specifically mentions a formal declaration of war by Congress,
Right.
which is different from other kinds of conflicts that the U.S. might be involved in,
Right.
military interventions or things like that. So that was his first big concern.
Mm-hmm.
His second concern was about using this wartime law against a non-state actor.
Right.
So in this case, a criminal gang.
Even though it's been designated a terrorist organization.
No. Exactly. And this is a really key point because even though the U.S. government has designated this gang as a foreign terrorist organization,
Mm-hmm.
it's not a sovereign nation
Right.
in the traditional sense.
Right.
And so that raises the question of whether the act can even be applied to something like that.
Okay.
And so the judge basically said, okay, I'm going to schedule a hearing
Okay.
on March 15th
Okay.
to hear arguments on both sides of this issue.
And it wasn't just the judge, right? There were other groups that had concerns about this.
Yeah, you're right.
I specifically remember the ACLU.
Yeah, the ACLU and other civil liberties organizations.
Right. They got involved.
Yeah, they immediately filed lawsuits challenging the administration's use of the act.
What were their arguments?
So their arguments really mirrored some of the judge's concerns.
Wow.
They basically said, look, this law, the Alien Enemies Act,
Mm-hmm.
was written for wartime,
Mm-hmm.
for when we're at war with another country.
Right.
And it shouldn't be used in situations like this,
Right.
where we're not formally at war with the nation where these individuals are from.
Right.
So they're saying this is a real overreach of presidential power.
Okay, so it sounds like the big question here is a law from the 1700s
Yeah.
meant for like traditional warfare?
Right.
Is it really a relevant tool for dealing with, more modern things like transnational crime?
Exactly. And, critics of this invocation of the act are saying, look, this is unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
This is potentially unconstitutional.
Right.
And they're worried that if this is allowed to stand,
Mm-hmm.
it could really change the balance of power
Right.
between the executive branch and the judicial branch when it comes to immigration and national security.
Because now all of a sudden the president can just say, oh, well, this is a national security issue,
Right.
and then use this very powerful law that was meant for war.
Exactly. And that's a really slippery slope that they're worried about.
Right.
And they're also worried about setting a precedent where
Yeah.
the executive branch could just bypass the normal legal processes when it comes to immigration
Right.
and, potentially infringe on the rights of individuals,
Even if they're not citizens?
even if they're not citizens.
Right.
So that's a really big concern that they have.
Okay. But I know there's also another side to this, right? People who say that this was justified?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are they saying?
So the people who support the administration's use of the act are saying, look, this is absolutely necessary to protect our national security.
Okay.
They see this gang, Tren de Aragua,
Mm-hmm.
as a very serious, incredible threat.
Mm-hmm.
And they think that the Alien Enemies Act gives them a tool that can be used quickly
Okay.
and effectively to counter their criminal activities.
Okay.
And they often say, these normal immigration processes, they're too slow.
Right.
They're too cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be able to act quickly.
To deal with this threat.
Exactly.
But isn't that kind of going against the very system that we have in place to deal with, criminals, whether they're from here or abroad?
Right. That's exactly one of the questions that's being raised.
And of course, as always, we are just presenting the different sides here
Of course.
and not endorsing any particular view.
Exactly.
It's just really interesting to see this debate play out.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to kind of start to wrap things up here, what are the big takeaways from all of this?
So I think the really big tension here is that this law, this Alien Enemies Act, gives a huge amount of power to the president,
Right.
particularly in times of war.
During wartime.
Yeah, and it's all in the name of national security.
Right.
Historically, it's been used in very specific situations where we've had these formal conflicts with other nations,
Right.
but using it against a non-state actor,
Mm-hmm.
like a gang.
In a time of peace, essentially.
Exactly.
Right, raises a lot of really complicated questions about, how far can the president's power actually go?
Right. Are we okay with using this law that was designed for one very specific context
Yeah.
in a completely different context?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's really what's being debated right now.
And it sounds like the courts are going to be the ones who decide ultimately what happens here.
Yeah, I mean, that temporary restraining order that the judge issued
Right.
and the hearing that's coming up, that's all really demonstrating the crucial role that the courts are going to play
Right.
in figuring out how this old law applies to the modern world.
To this very different situation.
Right. And also those lawsuits that were filed by those civil liberties organizations,
Mhm.
those are also going to be really important
Okay.
in determining how the Alien Enemies Act can be used in the future.
So we've taken this deep dive into this old law, and we've seen how relevant it is today.
It's amazing how something written so long ago
Right.
can still have such a huge impact on what's happening right now.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
It does.
Yeah.
And it kind of leads us to a final thought that we wanted to leave you with.
Okay.
Warfare is changing.
Right.
We're seeing these non-state actors, like gangs and terrorist organizations, play a bigger and bigger role on the world stage.
Right.
And so that leads to this really important question.
Mm-hmm.
How do we balance the need to protect our national security
Right.
with the rights of individuals,
Right.
whether they're citizens or not?
Right.
Is a law from 1798
Mm-hmm.
the right tool to use
Oh.
to deal with these really complex challenges that we're facing in the 21st century?
Right.
It's a tough question,
It is a really tough question.
and there are no easy answers.
So easy answers.
But it's definitely something that we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah, this is definitely a debate that's going to continue.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
Yeah, thanks for listening.
and we'll see you next time.
See you later.